My drunk wife came home from a girl's party with no underwear, so I left without a trace. Sam settled back against the cool leather of the couch, the rhythmic thump of his heart echoing the familiar cadence of Friday nights. The enticing aroma of Ava's signature pasta enveloped the room, seducing his senses as he stirred the sauce on the stove. Basil and garlic mingled in the air, crafting a comforting sanctuary that had always made their home feel alive. This evening, like countless before it, promised warmth and laughter, a celebration of the mundane that stitched their lives together. Yet tonight felt different. As Ava glided through the door, her energy sparkled like fireworks. "I'm going to a girl's party," she exclaimed, her eyes alight with excitement. She tossed her purse onto the counter, the jingle of its contents marking the space between them. Sam caught her infectious joy, his earlier sense of unease momentarily dulled by the thrill emanating from her. He planned to spend the evening with their cat Leo, who looked up at him with a knowing gaze, as if sensing the shift in their family's dynamic. "Have fun, babe," he said, injecting warmth into his voice that came too easily. "You deserve it. You've been working so hard." He wanted to trust her, to embrace this chance she had to unwind with old friends. At the same time, he busied himself with the evening's mundane tasks, preparing snacks for their Netflix binge whilst periodically glancing at the clock, trying to ignore the sinking feeling creeping into his gut like a filter of shadow. Hours passed swiftly as he lost himself in episodes of their favorite show, punctuated by the silence of an empty house. The world passed by outside their window, drenching the room in the stillness of night. But as the clock ticked past midnight, reality warped into uncertainty. He fished his phone from his pocket. A slew of messages bore no updates, just an unsettling emptiness that settled like dust on his heart. Each passing moment began gnawing at his insides, a desperate gnawing that screamed for answers. He tried to shake off the thoughts gripping him too tightly, those menacing ideas that curled like smoke in his mind, promising to choke out the faint glimmers of familiarity that made him love her. After all, it was just a party, right? Then the door swung open with a booming creak, as if it heralded her entrance like a chapter turning. Sam's chest tightened at the sight before him. Ava stood silhouetted against the hallway light, dressed in a shimmering sequin dress that clung awkwardly to her form, disheveled yet undeniably vibrant. She swayed slightly on her heels, her hair a wild halo of curls framing a face flush with heat, though it was not from the revelry of the evening but something deeper, something hidden beneath layers of laughter and careless smiles. "Hey, I'm back." Her voice, a lilting melody, danced through the air, but something felt off. It was too loud, too forced. For a moment, a haze of joy washed over him, making the past hours of unease seem foolish. But as she stepped forward, his eyes landed on her bare legs, the absence of underwear a stark, unfinished detail that skewered through his stomach like a shard of ice. His heart lurched violently. Questions rushed unbidden into his mind, sharp and insistent, slicing through the remnants of comfort. "Hey, how was it?" he managed, his voice strained as he fought against the apprehension crawling into his words, anxious to hear her say something that would snuff out the flicker of doubt igniting within him. But instead, Ava stumbled through her words, each excuse tumbling forth with a nervous energy that veiled something darker. "Oh, we danced. And Claire was so funny, she spilled red wine everywhere. It was totally wild." Her laughter, bright and erratic, bounced off the walls but didn't touch him. It felt like a failed performance, more confounding than reassuring. The warmth that had once enveloped him in her presence grew cold, replaced by a surge of confusion and disbelief. Caught in the crossfire of his emotions, Sam watched without fully seeing her, and the room felt overwhelmingly cramped. "Ava, are you all right?" he asked gently, almost afraid of hearing the truth that lurked just below the surface. "Of course. I just had a little too much to drink, I guess," she laughed, brushing off the concern, but he could hear the slight tremor in her words. Despite herself, Ava reached for him, one hand brushing against his arm, her warmth a stark contrast to the deep chill settling in his bones. But that touch felt distant, as if a barrier had grown between them that couldn't be crossed anymore. As their shared laughter began to dwindle into a tension-filled silence, each awkward second sneaked past like a thief in the night, gathering up the fragile threads of their connection. Sam's doubts coiled tighter around him, constricting and blurring every thought, as he felt the weight of the conversation squelch any remnant of the excitement that had welcomed her home. He was left standing in the aftermath of words unspoken, feelings unresolved, and something monumental had shifted irrevocably in the foundation of their relationship. He needed clarity, needed to extract truth from the tangled web of her laughter and shimmers. With every absurd excuse that fell from her lips, he felt the world they had built crumbling around him. Ava, I just want to know what really happened tonight, he whispered, uncertainty thickening the air between them like a heavy mist. For a fleeting moment, he saw the flash of something beneath her smile, something human and vulnerable, stripped of artifice. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by her practiced grin, too wide, too bright to be genuine. The recognition settled in with a heavy pang. Suddenly, the warmth of their home shifted, no longer a sanctuary but a battleground where trust and betrayal tore at the seams. The night stretched infinitely ahead, a chasm of unspoken words yawning wide between them. How had they arrived here? And what fate now awaited their marriage amidst these unsettling shadows? In that aching silence, time twisted, turning seconds into endless moments. The distance between them felt palpable, and as an ominous realization cast its shadow over his heart, he understood their shared laughter might never return. The damage from that night extended further than mere confusion. As dawn crept through the slatted blinds, painting the room in bands of golden light, I took a moment to study my surroundings, now an alien landscape. Once vibrant with promise, our home felt stifling, tainted by whispers of doubt that twisted through the air like phantom echoes. It was as if the very walls absorbed the pain that surrounded us, morphing every corner that had once radiated warmth into specters of betrayal and insecurity. I could hardly recognize the space that had been a sanctuary, a reflection of laughter and love that now resonated with an unfamiliar tension. The sun's gentle light illuminated the table where we shared countless breakfasts. Yet now all I could see was the potential for deceit nestled between the syrup and the toast crumbs, mementos of joy invaded by memories I wished to erase. Each relic felt as heavy as a tombstone, a reminder of moments shared with the woman I once believed was my unwavering partner. My thoughts spiraled into darkness, replaying every tender gesture, every shared glance, and every question that now felt like a dagger poised to cut deeper. In the days that followed, I tried to cling to what remained of our morning routine, pouring coffee while listening to the faint rustle of Ava as she glided through her day. But the soft cadence of her footsteps no longer spoke to companionship. Instead, I perceived them as signals of her disconnection. She moved with a practiced rhythm, her laughter, once a warm blanket, now echoed hollowly in my ears. It was warmth stripped of authenticity, tainted by the unyielding fear gnawing at my heart. Ava, do you have plans today? I ventured one morning, trying to grasp at straws for a normal conversation, an attempt to elude the festering uncertainty growing within me. Not really. Just hanging out with Claire later, she said, each word piling heavier atop the rubble of the night before. I read her tone like a weathered map, searching for familiar landmarks. It screamed nonchalance, a mask for something deeper. My stomach twisted into knots as I imagined her laughing and sharing secrets over brunch. That brightness reactivated by a bond one could no longer reach. I fought against the urge to dive into the tidal wave of accusations threatening to spill from my lips, the desperate need to unveil the truth that would set me free. But those were my thoughts clashing in the confines of my mind, and instead I merely nodded, affording her a smile that felt more like a grimace. But each day, the space between us stretched farther, like rubber bands pulled to their breaking point. In a sense, I could enumerate the moments in which I felt her slipping away, the stolen glances at her phone, the atonic way she sometimes responded to my inquiries as if she were merely going through the motions, the way her laughter faded to an echo of something that had once been vibrant and alive. Yet no matter how many clues I collected, confronting her felt like summoning a tempest I was terrified to unearth. All at once, her laughter rippled through the room one fateful evening, a fragile thing that danced like smoke. I had just stepped out of the shower, steam lingering heavily in the air, when I heard her in the other room on a video call with Claire. My heart stammered, splitting open as curiosity overwhelmed the intention to listen. "What are you talking about?" Claire asked, her voice punctuating their conversation like a tolling bell. "How is Sam? He seemed so, well, normal." "Oh, he's just doing his thing." Ava's voice chimed lightly, and I could visualize the forced smile stretching across her face, desperate to camouflage the turmoil gnawing at her heart. "We're still good, I swear," she continued, and that single word pierced through me. How could she use "still" when our bond teetered on the brink? I couldn't stand the thought of being portrayed as an outsider. Each syllable crystallized in the air and dulled my senses. The momentiness stretched longer than it should have, my heart thundering out of control as emotion swirled within me, a cocktail of betrayal and disbelief. In that moment, I was thrust back into the memories of passion shared and dreams built together, moments painted over by this burgeoning rift that threatened to engulf us. What had we become? A mere shell of what was once vibrant and alive? I pressed my palm against the cool tile, steadying myself, and yet with every word exchanged, I felt shards of myself crumble, echoing the same question that clawed at my mind. Who was the woman I had cherished for so long? It felt impossible to claw back trust from betrayal's jaws. Instead, I began searching for evidence that would validate every creeping thought haranguing my conscience. Each text message that faded into silence, each lingering look between us, begged to be scrutinized, prodding me to forge the connection between suspicion and certainty. Emotions wound tightly within me as I sifted through the memories of our love, re-examining snapshots of bliss through the lens of doubt. Ava's mundane habits now seemed loaded with implications. Every twitch of her brow and every cheerful lilt in her voice became the trigger of festering resentment. I felt as if I were witnessing a performance, and the truth lay veiled beneath layers of laughter and complicity. Caught in this stranglehold, there again arose the question, was I merely projecting my fears? Did I understand the depth of her childhood scars, the wellspring of her insecurities that perhaps compelled her to stray? I wrestled with guilt as I recalled our moments of intimacy, the warmth of her fingers tracing my skin, juxtaposed sharply against the chill of her absence now. As the memories uncovered laid bare my fears, I feared I, too, had shackled her with expectations. The room pulsed with tension as I replayed past conflicts in my head, creeping questions clawing at my conscience. Ava remained blissfully unaware of the emotional storm brewing inside me, living beneath the faint whispers of concern that gnawed at my heart, assimilating with the weight of unspoken words. And yet, when she looked at me, I tried my best to mask the storm inside, drowning out the demons suffocating me with those smiling eyes that mirrored what once felt uncomplicated. It felt desperate, even futile, to cling so fiercely to the good moments, the laughter that had once painted our walls bright with joy. Yet a cruel reality gnawed at me, wrapping itself like barbed wire around my heart each time I found her gazing into the distance, lost in thoughts that could very well belong to another. As my mind danced between feeling and reasoning, I braced myself against the looming unknown. Trust, once the fragile foundation of our love, now felt like quicksand. Ava was still present, yet she existed behind a drawn curtain, and I could only see the silhouette of who she had become. In some ways, I was fighting against shadows, ghostly reminders of what I had lost, the woman I loved, the partner I had envisioned building my life with. And as I stood there, burdened by the weight of it all, time felt as if it had conspired against us. What awaited us now? Hope or despair? It became harder to discern the two, and I feared that the truth might very well shake the very foundations of what we had built together. The glow of my phone's screen illuminated the dark corners of the room, as if a spotlight had landed exactly on my simmering anxieties. I stared, heart racing, as my thumb pressed against the glass, scrolling through the messages like reading the script of a play I hadn't auditioned for. Each word felt like shards of ice sliding through the cracks in my veneer of hope. It was evening now, shadows painting the walls, and Ava was somewhere in the apartment, likely sprawled across the couch with that novel she'd been absorbed in for weeks, the one I had convinced myself held her attention more than I did. But this felt like anything but the love we promised each other. I stumbled across a series of texts between her and someone named Jake. At first, they seemed harmless enough, a compliment here, a teasing remark there, tinged only slightly with flirtation. Yet, as I read on, the undercurrents of something deeper slithered into view, reminiscent of dark waters concealing sharp rocks just below the surface. There was a comfort in their banter that struck so profoundly. It pierced right through the tendrils of trust that I had woven around our marriage. My gut twisted, revealing a raw, tender wound, as I struggled to breathe through the betrayal swelling in the pit of my stomach. This connection was all too real, cementing the icy grasp of dread clutching my heart. Jake wasn't just a name on a screen. He was a stranger who now felt like a ghost haunting the periphery of my marriage. Every laugh shared on those texts felt like a secret rebellion against what we built together. Just then my eyes caught sight of a hotel charge slipping through the threads of our shared finances. The date matched the night of that girl's party. It settled into my bones as an undeniable truth, the final note of a requiem played on a single instrument. My heart thudded heavily against my ribcage as the gravity of it all crashed in waves upon me. I set down the phone, the screen now dark, and rested my head in my hands, feeling the boundaries of my resolve straining dangerously under the weight of this revelation. It wasn't just the affair that churned in my gut. It was all the memories I had held so dearly, the fabric of love that had begun to fray with each lie and moment of negligence. The image of Ava laughing, the warmth of her touch, and every shared embrace began to disintegrate, replaced with an unbearable awareness that my trust had been shattered, splintering into fragments of self-doubt and questions without end. Did she think of me while texting him? Did she ever admit to herself that, with each keystroke, she was tearing at the seams of our life together? The love I once knew felt like a marionette rehearsing in the spotlight of betrayal, strings pulled by hands that no longer seemed to belong to her. Frustration bubbled beneath my surface, boiling over into something darker as I paced the floor of our living room, the wooden planks creaking underfoot. My mind spun wildly, tangled up in emotions I thought I'd mastered. The trust one had placed in her felt like scattered leaves in a windstorm, taunting me. I felt deceitful thoughts skittering into my head like uninvited guests, tugging at the corners of my sanity. Part of me ached to confront her, to tear down the veil that hung between us and lay bare the truth of my findings. But fear tethered me back, cementing my resolve against engaging in a chaotic confrontation that would send us spiraling into mutual destruction. I envisioned limitless accusations flying across the room like stray bullets, igniting deeper wounds. It felt like standing on the precipice of a cliff where one misstep could lead to the immersion in a cold, dark abyss. Instead, I started to plot my exit, meticulously devising a way to leave without leaving a trace, without dragging out the pain waiting just beneath the surface. I pictured not the lash of hurtful words exchanged, but rather my own departure as a quiet act of reclamation, a subtle release from the chaos of my heart spiraling out of control. I didn't want to find myself on the battlefield of our deteriorating relationship, armed to the teeth with accusations but feeling as if none of them were truly mine to wield. So I retreated further into myself, designing a plan in the silence of my solitude. Inhale. Exhale. Replace anger with strategy. Replace love with elimination. Each day spent acting as though everything was fine felt like another layer of frosting on the cover of a cake that was crumbling on the inside. I was slowly disassembling the illusion, piece by piece, preparing for the inevitable separation. The thought that perhaps I had failed her in ways I had begun to recognize clawed relentlessly at my insides. Maybe I had become predictable, a book whose pages had turned yellow and cracked, surrendering their stories to the element of time rather than the passion we once knew. Doubt spiraled, tangled tightly with a growing resentment I couldn't fully articulate. With the truth lurking barely beyond reach, I internalized my feelings, attempting to navigate a shipwrecked vessel in the wild seas of suspicion. I didn't want to be the victim, played by the circumstances of her choices. Yet here I was, meticulously preparing to rebuild not only my shattered belief in her, but my own identity. I began to think of a life I could carve out for myself, routines built back to their core, starting anew rather than struggling through the mire of broken promises. Ava continued to float about the apartment, her presence as palpable as an itch irritating the back of my mind. Each glance in her direction felt heavy with the burden of unspoken truths. Looking at her would sometimes send pangs of anger and grief spiraling through my guts, but there were also moments when a reminder of her laughter would pierce my heart precisely because I sensed that, within her, the essence of the woman I had loved still lingered. But as much as I wanted to dive into a recounting of our joys, it served as a reminder that every smile now felt like a charade, leaving me gasping for air beneath the weight of deception. Even the mundane shared rituals, the evening cups of tea that had become somewhat of a sanctuary, now tasted of bitterness, leaving a void that threatened to expand into the spaces where affection once thrived. The thin veil between love and betrayal became an unbearable chasm, and with each passing day, it called to me louder than before. Awoken by sleepless nights, I began to grasp that the moments we once cherished were now echoing reminders of a love on the verge of collapse. So many fragments, so much to sift through. I felt each step I took moved me closer to that inevitable confrontation. Yet I had only to look into her eyes to recognize the repercussions that awaited, a fury sparked by sheer realization, an agony that would evoke the most earnest sea of tears. The irony twisted within me. Clinging to the tether of our love while preparing for the leap away from her was unconventional, perhaps foolish. But the unwavering desire to escape this torment bolstered me, urging me onward, holding the promise of a new beginning just out of reach. While the sun set outside, casting a golden hue on the world, I felt myself suspended in time, standing on the edge of a decision that would forever alter the course of our lives, the moment I could choose to stop holding the pieces of her betrayal and finally reclaim the pieces of my own shattered heart. Sam became a ghost in his own life, moving through the space they had shared like an actor lost in a play where the script had abruptly changed, leaving him to navigate an unfamiliar stage. Their house, once a comfortable sanctuary filled with memories and laughter, now felt like a museum of their past, a collection of artifacts beneath glass, all glossed over yet no longer accessible. With every passing moment, he recorded the ordinary details: Ava's innocuous outings, her laughter spilling over her latest tales from work, her happiness radiating outward like sunbeams, and all the while, he felt enveloped in darkness. Each bright smile she offered chipped away at the trust that had once anchored them, transforming her joy into an affront he could not ignore. He became meticulous in his observations, as if cataloging the intricacies of betrayal that lingered like ghosts in the corners of their home. The evenings she claimed she was having dinner with friends turned into a shadowy charade, her carefree attitude igniting resentment deep within him, festering like a wound left to the mercy of time. It was an unintentional mourning of their relationship, slowly fading away without warning, and each day revealed more layers, more secrets entangled in a web thickening around them both. With meticulous care, Sam siphoned money from their joint account, slipping away bits for himself like a thief in the night, careful to mask the signs of his inner turmoil. Each deposit he made into his personal account felt like an investment in his future, the lifeboat he was preparing for when the ship of their marriage finally sank. Every painstaking transaction became testament to a hardening resolve, evidence that he could salvage pieces of himself, even if he couldn't salvage them together. Each evasive answer he crafted in response to Ava's innocent questions weighed heavier on his heart, twisting the knife of deceit as he reassured her that everything remained as it was, a hollow smile plastered across his face. Then there were her laughs regarding yet another gathering, the way she seemed to burst with excitement, details spilling from her lips like music notes in a symphony. But instead of sparking joy within him, that laughter echoed hollowly in his heart, reverberating in the confines of his mind like a siren song warning of impending doom. What had he become, he wondered, as he packed away fragments of their life together? Tiny tokens of love collected over time, neatly folded and stored under layers of cardboard. With every item set aside, he felt the enormous weight of loss threatening to suffocate him. He was losing more than just a marriage. He was severing ties with the person he once was. The image of their first date played in his mind like an old film reel. He remembered the way her hair shimmered in the sunlight, the lightness of their laughter as they stumbled through conversations over those first glasses of wine. He clung to that version of himself, a man confident in love and commitment. But with every piece of evidence he unearthed, the joyous memories faded into obscurity. Ava's careless abandon, her flippant attitude toward their relationship, haunted him relentlessly. He found himself stuck in a loop of thoughts that served only to mock that version of life they had promised each other, a life built on trust and security, now riddled with doubts and dark specters of betrayal. Each step further into this abyss of disgust and disbelief felt like each shaking bridge painstakingly rotting beneath his feet. Frustration bubbled beneath his surface like water, simmering on the verge of a boil as he paced their living room. The wooden planks creaked underfoot, a haunting echo of the breaks that now stung the heart of their home. What had felt like a shared journey was now a scene orchestrated by deception. The trust in her mirth and supposed loyalty felt more like chains, dragging him down into a pit. To her, he must have seemed like a devoted partner, and yet inside, he was bursting with resentment, the realization of betrayal swirling through his mind like a tempest leading him toward dark conclusions. There was a visceral pull to confront the lingering truths. The whispers of resentment clawed at him insistently. But every time he envisioned the confrontation, a cold edge of fear seized him. He could picture Ava's confusion, her momentary strength crumbling into panic as accusations flew around like bullets in combat. The thought of this unraveling was more terrifying than being left or losing her. It was the agony of being thrust into a storm with no escape, drowning in a torrent of harsh truths and emotions. It felt like a betrayal of his own heart to dive into that chaos willingly. Instead, he devised a plan, outlining a way to leave without leaving a trace, creating a silent exit devoid of theatrical confrontation and keeping her from witnessing the chaos brewing under his composed demeanor. He would slip away quietly, reclaiming the pieces of himself that were no longer tethered to her whims or lies. Each calculated day felt like a soft undertow, pulling him deeper into the shadows. Concealing his intentions wore on him like a heavy shroud, each passing day filled with splinters of guilt. But even in that guilt, there was a strange sense of power, a revelation that perhaps he could survive this betrayal, as tumultuous as it felt. The life he had envisioned did not have to be extinguished alongside the one he was leaving behind. He often caught himself staring at her when she was lost in her world, a memory suspended in amber. Those moments became frayed around the edges, bleeding into sadness as the anger consumed more of his thoughts. Ava embodied sweetness. Softness that once brought him solace now jarred him painfully. The juxtaposition of once tender moments, now marred by a shadow of betrayal, was almost unbearable. The evenings they had shared gradually became tinged with bitter nuances. Their nightly cups of tea turned bitter on his tongue. Even small gestures, a brush of her hand against his shoulder, her breath against his neck, now felt like quiet betrayals, scorched marks of love that had turned toxic. Sam felt the sensation of safe harbors and promised futures slip like sand between his fingers. The thought that maybe he had failed her began to gnaw at his edges and distracted him from the present. Had he become complacent? Predictable? The deep-seated wrestle within him tore at any semblance of resolve he fought to build. The tender memories transformed into haunting reminders of a bond frayed at the seams, and the image of that joyful man he had once been felt like an old photograph, fading away in a forgotten drawer. But with each emotion came an undercurrent of determination. He could not continue as he was, trapped within a narrative no longer authored by him. The reevaluation of love and trust became a springboard, lifting him into the realization that he needed to choose his path. The push towards what could be, without the weight of Ava's betrayal tied to him, felt invigorating yet gnawed at the remnants of hope he could cling to. Standing on the precipice of decision, he surrendered to the notion that while endings can break the heart, they also give way to new beginnings. But confronting every shade of pain he felt ahead would not be an easy ordeal. Rather, it would require an honesty and strength he had never found before. As the golden hues of sunset cast a warm glow throughout the room, he began to recognize the delicate art of navigation that awaited him. A quiet resolve settled in his bones, urging him forward. He had the power to reclaim joy, whether he left willingly or not. Each moment that he fought to suppress reflected a flicker of hope, whispering to him that there was a light ahead. The choice was his, whether to cling to the woman who had betrayed him or to step into a world waiting beyond the darkness, craving the breath of fresh air more than he had ever known before. For the better part of a week, we traversed the false landscape of normalcy, our lives reduced to a series of well-rehearsed dialogues and practiced gestures. The evenings twisted and turned like the insidious roots of a vine, constricting around the truth neither of us dared articulate. I would fix dinner, watching Ava stir the pasta, her features illuminated by the soft glow of the kitchen lights. Every laugh that slipped from her lips pierced through me, the sound vibrant and free, yet it struck a dissonant chord against the grim reality settling quietly in the recesses of my mind. I crafted delicate inquiries about her day, probing for any sign of remorse lurking beneath her carefree facade. How was dinner with Claire and the rest of the girls? I'd ask, my voice laced with a casualness that felt more performative than sincere. Ava would smile, her eyes twinkling, as she recounted the life she had spun outside of our home, woven with friends and late-night escapades. My heart clenched with each word, the vision of her joy morphing into an affront, deepening the fissure of betrayal that was growing between us. I sensed an unshakable truth that my questions would vanish into the air, like whispers dissipating into the growing night. Her obliviousness wrapped around me like a heavy fog. Every enchanting laugh felt like a mockery, sharp and piercing, reinforcing the madness of my thoughts. Sam, the once devoted husband transformed into a mere observer, stood at odds with the deepening pain that colored my evenings. Each brush of affection, her hand brushing against my arm, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched mindless television, felt like tiny blades, unending in their assault. Ava had claimed my heart long ago, yet her laughter now felt like rotting fruit, sweet at first glance but ultimately poisoned. Night after night, I lay in bed beside her, bodies close but boundaries sharper than knives, the ticking clock on our nightstand echoing like a metronome of my racing heart. How absurd it was, I thought, drenched in an ache that festered under the surface. Her steady breathing next to me felt like a haunting lullaby, coaxing me towards thoughts I had consciously suppressed. I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand answers to the questions that roared in my head like a storm. Instead, I kept silent, trapped within the confines of a relationship that had spun out of my control. It was suffocating. This illusion we had crafted together thrummed relentlessly in the silence that filled our home. I turned inward, searching for the raw honesty that had once characterized our union. The betrayal cast long shadows over every corner of my thoughts, staining our memories with darkness that I couldn't escape. I found myself staring at our wedding picture on the wall, the one moment of happiness rendered forever frozen in time. The vision of us smiling then felt like a cruel joke, an ironic meandering of fate that had drawn us toward this abyss, her carelessness, my despair. As absences grew heavier, the weight of grief formed me into a shipwrecked survivor, drifting farther from the shores of the life I had known. I started to slip away, to siphon money from our coalesced affairs and turn my gaze from her laughter. With each moment, I noted every detail of our failing world, as if I were compulsively documenting the dichotomy of what love had been and what it had become. Now it lay in fragments, beaten and bloodied, enshrined in the wreckage of our past, the assorted trinkets of our shared life packed dimly in boxes in a corner. With every exhale, I tossed aside dreams of reconciliation, carving away pieces of myself in preparation for the inevitable departure that loomed ahead. Late into the night, I found solace in solitude as I compiled a letter meant for her, a measured expression of the wound that throbbed in my chest, a bittersweet farewell woven with regret. As I wrote, tears smudged the ink. Each stroke of the pen felt like a final exclamation mark on a relationship shrouded in silence, a finish to the tale that had once blossomed with vibrance. The note captured the essence of my pain, the love turned hollow beneath pages colored by misunderstanding and absence. "I need to leave, Ava," I wrote, the words ringing loudly in the dim hollow of my heart. There was beauty in the cruelty of that phrase. I could finally express what I had kept bound within me for too long. A quiet resolve helped ease the agony, knowing that I was doing this for myself as I placed the folded paper in an envelope, sealing the fate of a life together with her name scrawled softly across the front. I caught her laughter one last time, a bright sound cascading from the living room, ignorant of the darkness lurking just outside our home. I found her then animated and alive, as details of her day spilled from her lips with a joyous abandon that twisted my heart further. "Did you see Claire's new dress?" she quipped, her eyes dancing with a light I craved for myself. But all I could envision was the gaping chasm between us, the truth rising to consume me. Each playful poke felt like a gentle reminder of all I had lost, a reminder that something precious had shattered in balance beyond repair. And in the echo of her laughter, my silence solidified. I would not tell her. The gulf would remain, the make-believe of normalcy shrouding our hearts like a thin veil. The vision of our first date often sprang to mind, a melody looping in my head. In those moments when we first met, our connection bloomed with softness and sweetness, illuminating lives woven with love. Now, under the shadow of betrayal, the reality of our love became tainted, memories twisting into scenes of melancholy as I lamented the distance that formed with every encounter. The physical presence of Ava next to me only illuminated the heart-wrenching distance we had ventured into, separation igniting within me like a slow-burning fire. So I sat in lonely contemplation, watching as she flitted through the room, unaware of the storm brewing in my heart, preparing for the inevitable reckoning. Each passing day became a countdown to my own liberation, my heart inching closer to the date where I would step into the unknown, a future reborn without the memories of a woman who had taken sanctuary in the shadows while I had bled to keep our home. I resolved to finish the letter, crafting each word with care, carving out a farewell that embraced every fracture of our love. It became more than just an abandonment. It captured the story of a man yearning to reclaim his life, an ode to the past I would leave behind, a final invitation to chart paths anew. The illusion of normalcy had shattered, and with its remnants clinging to my heart, I took a deep breath and prepared myself to step into a future that promised uncertainty but held the glittering possibility of rediscovery. As the final hours compressed into the shrouded corners of our home, I was swept away by nostalgia, the air thick with the bittersweet memories of a love I was about to leave behind. I glanced around our living room, walls painted in indigo blue, filled with pictures that bore witness to our laughter and love, now refracting only the ache of betrayal that clung to each surface like dust. It felt surreal to move through these spaces, packing up the fragments of my once cherished life. Each item I touched, a ceramic mug we bought together on our honeymoon, the cozy blanket draped over the couch, even her favorite books lined up on the shelf, whispered to me, begging me not to go. But I knew better. The material clutter that surrounded me had become suffocating, reminders of a bond that had corroded into something unrecognizable. Ava remained oblivious, lost in the world beyond our walls. I could hear her laughter drifting down the hall, tinged with a careless joy that felt foreign. The discord between us hummed beneath layers I could no longer ignore, echoing louder with every moment I spent observing her. It clawed at me, relentless and suffocating, a constant reminder of the truths we had masked beneath the surface. I picked up our wedding photo from the coffee table, tracing my fingers over our blissful expressions. How naive we had been. I could still remember the giddiness that enveloped us that day, the promises exchanged with all the fervor of youth. But standing in the aftermath of our shattered union, that photo felt more like a distant memory than a touchstone, a cruel juxtaposition of the love we had fostered against the betrayal that had eclipsed it. Tears pricked my eyes as I set the picture aside, trying to avoid the heavy weight of sentimentality that threatened to anchor me in the past. I had to remain resolute. The time grew late. Dawn crept closer, the silhouette of night beginning to retreat like a tide. My heart was an errant drum, pounding in a rhythm syncopated with anxious anticipation. Each item I shoved into boxes was accompanied by a mix of grief and relief, as if I were burying a friend while simultaneously freeing myself from a long-winded sorrow. I was a cat burglar of my own life, tiptoeing through the remnants of a home that had once brimmed with love but now felt hollow and unforgiving. The sounds of our breaths echoed quietly through the house, the soft hum of the heater, Ava's animated chatter about nothing in particular. I wished I could reach out, shake her from her reverie, force her to confront the desolation that had settled like a fog between us. But instead, I focused on my mission, the careful packing and act of purging that felt painfully necessary. As I loaded the car with select pieces, boxes filled with framed memories, mementos of a different time, I stole glances at the living room where I could still see her, animated and wrapped up in her own world. It was agonizing to watch, knowing that while I was preparing to sever ties, she still lived under the illusion that everything remained intact. I brushed aside the shame curling at the edges of my conscience. This was a savage act of erasure. I was purging a love that had turned to ash, taking my power back, even if it meant leaving her in the dark. With each box I closed, a part of me tore away. It became easier to forget, easier to push aside the memories that would only haunt me if I lingered on them too long. I fought against the urge to take just one more look at her, one last moment to remember the beauty she once radiated, the laughter that we had built our lives around. But doing so would risk pulling me back into the orbit of our shared life, and I couldn't afford that slip. Not now. The cruel irony nestled deep in my gut when I finally retrieved the white envelope, the letter that housed my farewell. I trailed my fingers along its edges, the ink still fresh with my trembling, anguished scrawl. For a fleeting second, the weight of regret blossomed within me, like a flower buried in winter that suddenly yearned to bloom. But I silenced it swiftly, wrapping the note in resolve. This wasn't merely an act of departure. It was my reclamation of self, a hard-won step into unfamiliar territory that promised both challenge and hope. Setting the letter on the kitchen counter, I allowed myself to inhale one final time, a breath heavy with everything that had transpired. I could sense the air thick with memories yet undisturbed, heavy with the weight of what could have been. But now wasn't the time to linger. I approached the threshold that had once felt like a portal to safety, and yet now symbolized an exit from heartache. I stepped softly past the familiar spaces, each movement a farewell disguised as a breath, a physical embodiment of a life unspooled. Crossing the doorway, I felt the cool morning air wash over me, the veil of darkness lifting as glimmers of light seeped in. The air was thick with possibility, the unknown stretching out before me like a road yet traveled. I glanced back, the house retreating into the depths of the shadows behind me. I felt both an ache and a thrill coiling within, one final pang of love mixed with deep resentment, leaving remnants of a relationship that had once held promise but had ultimately been betrayed. And when I turned my gaze forward, embracing both anxieties and hopes swirling in my chest, I finally took the first step into my new beginning, heart pounding steadily with each footfall. As dawn broke, illuminating the path away from her home, I felt the weight of the world pulling at me, yet I had chosen this. With every mile I drove, a serenity began to wash over me, mingling with the chaos of my thoughts. The landscape blurred into a watercolor painting of greens and blues, the raw edges of a dreamscape merging with the bitter reminders of my reality. I allowed my mind to drift, like the clouds sweeping past, releasing the weight of memories that had painted my world into a hue of sadness. 5 hours into my escape, the quiet hum of the engine filled my ears, contrasting sharply with the tempest raging in my heart. Ava, her laughter, her light, her brilliant but fickle soul was tethered to everything I had left behind. I caught myself recalling her smile, how it had once wrapped around me like a warm cocoon, forging a connection that now felt like fragile glass, shattered into pieces scattered across a desolate floor. I was left clutching at echoes of who I used to be, a man with dreams entwined in love, now broken and hollowed by betrayal. My hands gripped the steering wheel, As if by sheer force of will, I could navigate my own spiraling emotions. The phone buzzed in my pocket, more persistent than the mocking reminiscences flooding my mind. I fished it out, my heart racing with reluctance. I knew who it would be before I even unlocked the screen. Ava, the harbinger of chaos I had deliberately abandoned. Her frantic messages flooded through, pixels spreading across my screen like tides against the shore, relentless and unyielding. Sam, where are you? Please talk to me. I don't understand what's happening. Did I do something wrong? With each message, I felt the walls close in on me all over again. Every text was a reminder of the dissonance that had grown between us, a trust twisted into knots too tight to unbind. I could almost picture her, disheveled hair, wide eyes filled with confusion, scanning the house for evidence of my departure, her heart pounding with a creeping dread of abandonment. The thought sent a gnawing pang through me, yet I remained resolute in my silence, knowing my voice would only echo back to me in their confrontation. I let the impulse to respond slip through my fingers like sand. The truth was, she needed this chaos as much as I did. My absence acted as a mirror, compelling her to confront the demons that had lurked beneath her carefree laughter. It was an awakening, a catalyst for reckoning. Sometimes, chaos is the only way to stir still waters. I felt no guilt as I scrolled through her messages, instead feeling a certain grim satisfaction in knowing she had to grapple with the weight of her choices. Her last message lingered in my mind. I thought we were happy. What a haunting line this was in its simplicity. It had all felt real once, hadn't it? But in this moment of raw reflection, I realized that happiness and ignorance had intertwined, weaving a deception that had crumbled under the pressure of truth. The road ahead stretched infinitely, and with my phone still in hand, I turned off notifications, surrendering it to the depths of my bag. I drove on in silence, accompanied only by my swirling thoughts and the gentle rustle of leaves outside, which fluttered like whispers from a distant world. The sun peeked over the horizon, shedding light onto the day, illuminating the cracks in my own facade as well. Eventually, I pulled into a small roadside diner, its neon sign flickering a welcome against the morning backdrop. I stepped into the warmth, greeted by the aroma of coffee and greasy breakfast fare, a respite from my internal storm. Sliding into a booth at the far end, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, reclaiming moments I had scarcely paused to savor. The waitress approached, her smile inviting despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "What can I get you?" she asked, and I ordered a coffee, black, something bitter to accompany the tang of loss on my tongue. I stared into the cup, remembering the countless mornings Ava and I had spent over coffee, recounting our dreams, confiding our fears. Each sip felt like an echo of what once was, nourishing the ache that settled in my chest. Outside, a couple appeared, fingers entwined, laughter spilling openly between them like a melody I hadn't heard in years. In that moment, the contrast felt unbearable. Where had our laughter gone? I felt a barrier grow between the world I now inhabited and the love I'd once known, a chasm suffused with mist and shadows, separating me from warmth and connection. Inside me, conflict brewed. Ava was out there, searching frantically for me, grappling with confusion and regret of her own. Yet I remained out of reach, a deliberate evasion steeped in pain, both hers and mine. I couldn't help but wonder if she too was haunted by echoes, by pieces of us lingering in the corners of her mind, or if she had already shifted into a reality unburdened by the weight of our shared existence. The waitress returned, sliding the steaming cup across the table. "Here you go. You okay?" Her concern pierced through my thoughts, pulling me back into the moment. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt uneasy on my lips. I sipped the coffee, seeking solace in the routine of it. Flames ignited of memory, recalling shared dinners wrapped in playful banter, the comfortable silence of nights spent on the couch. Yet paradoxically, I felt the warmth of bitterness fuse even deeper within me. It wasn't the warmth of nostalgia. It was a kind of fire that forced me to question everything I once thought to be true. As I glanced down at my phone, it lay silent, a resting weight through which I could finally begin plotting my future. I stood, resolved, and shuffled back to my car. Ava might have needed me before, but I realized now that I needed to confront not only the chaos I had left behind, but the potential of what lay ahead. I felt a flicker of hope, igniting within the turmoil that had become my catalyst for change. With a steady heart, I turned the ignition and began to steer back into the world, aching still but armed with the knowledge that the path forward was one I could navigate. I was headed toward the unknown, a canvas yet to be painted, embracing the uncertainty that would face me with each passing moment, carrying with me the lessons of love, betrayal, and the promise of rebirth. In the days that followed, my world collapsed into a cacophony of uncertainty. Each morning greeted me with a relentless weight of guilt, echoing the judgment cast by my friends who, like rough stones pressing against my exposed heart, were slowly connecting the dots. Where once I felt safe among them, their voices now morphed into whispers filled with condemnation. Claire, who had always been my fortress, spurred me to confront the truth, imploring me to decipher the fractures that had begun to intertwine with the story of my life. Your marriage isn't just a casualty, Ava. It's a mirror reflecting back what you've ignored, she said one evening, her brow creased with concern over shared glasses of wine that felt more confessional than celebratory. What do you mean ignored? I shot back defensively, even though I felt the unrelenting tide of self-doubt swell beneath her words. In truth, I had come to learn that the girl I once was, the carefree spirit eager to connect and build, had morphed into a jaded version of myself within the confines of my marriage, a dance with shadows, flirting with the edge of what was once pure joy. Talk to Sam, Claire encouraged softly. You must own this mess you've created. But I couldn't. How could I? My heart churned at the thought of facing him, the man I had effortlessly glided through much of my life with, now just a distant specter haunting my memories. As my thoughts jumbled, guilt twisted my stomach into knots, my insides a raw chasm of what if haunting me in the night. What began as a spirited night out, the laughter and freedom, a brief glimpse into what I thought was a liberated realm, had morphed into something dreadfully stifling. The initial thrill had evaporated, replaced instead by a gnawing emptiness that clawed at my heart, further knotting the fabric of my existence. I circulated through the motions of daily life, work papers piled on my desk, idle chit-chat with colleagues devoid of warmth, and flirtations with acquaintances that felt increasingly shallow, serving to distract and delude myself. Every exchange felt like a gentle reprimand wrapped in kindness, their words laced with pity as if they could see the scars. They unfolded their concern like a newspaper, revealing the articles of ridicule as they gestured toward my absent husband, the man who punctuated my silence with longing echoes of laughter. Their backhanded compassion hovered like a shadow, a lingering reminder of my choices that had previously been veiled in the intoxicating allure of excitement. The simplest things became unbearable. Places we had traveled together now felt like monuments to betrayal. Each playful comment, every gentle tease fell flat, replaced by the sharp sting of others drawing silently back as if their presence alone could expose the chasm I had wrought. As I agreed to drinks with coworkers, my laughter rang hollow. I sipped carefully from my glass, desperately trying to appear engaged. Conversations drifted around me like shrouded specters, revealing laughter and joy unbroken by my festering guilt. But beneath the surface, I felt dissonant, a voice vibrating up my spine reminding me of the darkness I harbored and how I had shattered the very essence of communion I had once cherished. "How's Sam?" a colleague asked sympathetically. I met their eyes, glistening with kindly curiosity that only turned my stomach further. Sam. His name was a haunting refrain that echoed in my mind but became a bitter aftertaste on my tongue. "It's complicated," was all I could muster, my heart heavy as I turned the conversation back to safe topics. Coping with shallow companionship provided a refuge, yet it was a home built of sand, quickly vanishing beneath the weight of the tide. I would always circle back to my actions, to the decisions that led to this isolation, yet each time I did, I felt the ground shift underfoot. The silence of my phone became thunderous. Each vibration felt like a sin I had yet to confess. I avoided calls from Sam, unable to confront the reality that lay within the contours of our bond, now tethered to a thread of doubt. The dread of his voice ignited a visceral reaction in me, forcing my breath to stutter each time that familiar name pulsed through me. Unfolding the reality of what I had done left me feeling naked, exposed, every inch of me bartered for freedom from guilt but gaining nothing but two souls entangled in unanswered questions. So I carefully packed my feelings away beneath layers of denial. I replayed each encounter I shared with Jake, the man who had unknowingly ignited a fire that consumed my marriage, a reckless distraction from the void festering within. I sought solace through self-indulgence, carving pathways around the unbearable truth hidden in the fabric of my reality. The softer embraces of fleeting connections served to numb the harsh reality lurking just beneath the surface. Yet the futility of this denial clawed at me. It whispered every night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while the shadows stretched ominously around me. My own choices, draped in the guise of innocuous flirtation and closeness, now loomed over me like a storm, inescapable, relentless. I felt suspended in the clutches of guilt, aware that my attempt at escapes were nothing but temporary fixes. Claire pressed me again one evening. "You have to confront this, Ava. Pretending it didn't happen will not restore what you've lost." Still, I hesitated, caught in a purgatory of introspection and self-loathing. The thought of standing before Sam, returning to shattered memories, faces entwined in laughter, now turned to silent stares haunted by deceit, weighed on my heart. Facing him felt akin to walking into a lion's den, stripped bare, my essence divested under his scrutinous gaze. No longer could I delay the inevitable confrontation with my choices. I realized that there was a stark truth in Claire's insistence. Hope lay not in trying to resurrect my marriage through illusion. Rather, it demanded me to acknowledge what dwelled within me, confronting both my flaws and the worth of a bond one had carelessly shredded. And so, in the quiet that surrounded me, I gathered my courage, a delicate ember of resolve sparking within the shadows. It was time to unearth the truth, to sift through the remnants of what had been. I would confront the ghost of Sam and the choices I had made, seeking something, perhaps not redemption, but liberation. As the thought solidified, I knew confronting him would be both the hardest and most necessary step to reclaiming both our truths. The gathering storm within me called for an upheaval, drawing me into the call of confrontation. I would not run any longer. What began as a reckoning with my past would evolve into an opportunity to redefine my future. It was time at last to cast aside the veil of deception and step boldly into the sunlight, painful though the steps might be. As days stretched into weeks, I found myself spiraling deeper into the confines of a life that had once felt vibrant and full of promise. The ease I had once relished, so intricately stitched into the fabric of my daily routines, now seemed suffocating, heavy like a curtain of lead draping over every moment. I would wake each morning, the light filtering through the window only amplifying the darkness within me, and for a heartbeat, I would forget. Yet just as swiftly, memories would crash back in, the laughter, the connection, the warmth of Sam's embrace, only to be replaced by the cold steel of regret for what I had forsaken in my reckless pursuit of fleeting excitement. Each passing day morphed into an exercise in denial, as I stared at the woman in the mirror and felt repelled by her reflection. Beneath the surface of my carefully curated persona, I felt like an imposter, someone masquerading in a skin that used to fit comfortably, now ill-suited and foreign. The glimmer of joy in my eyes was extinguished, replaced by a cloud of shame hovering above my head, an ominous reminder of the choices I had made. The guilt was like an anchor, keeping me tethered to the scenes of betrayal I had clamored to escape, clinging to my ankles as I tried to rise above the waves of my own making. The nights were the worst. It was as if the silence itself conspired against me, each quiet moment stretching into eternity. As I lay in bed, the shadows dappled along the walls. I would replay the details of that fateful night when I carelessly crossed the line into another man's arms, abandoning the sanctity of my vows. The paradoxical freedom I had felt in those fleeting hours was now shackled to the existence I had robbed myself of. I could feel the specter of my marriage gnawing at me, wistful and mournful. And my Sam loomed larger than life in the hollow space beside me. During the day, I forced myself to adopt a semblance of normalcy, attending work as if the world hadn't tilted off its axis. Coworkers engaged in idle chatter that now felt painfully incongruent with my reality. Their smiles and laughter grew increasingly irritating, each chuckle reminding me of my hollow victories and the facade I lived behind. "Ava," they would say, "are you coming to the office party? It'll be so much fun." I wanted to scream that fun had exited my life, replaced by a gaping hole where love once resided. My friend Claire felt like a judgment wrapped in layers of concern. "When are you going to talk to Sam? You owe him that much," she insisted during one of our many conversations. Each time she pressed, I felt the weight of her words crash down on me like waves eroding a shoreline. There was no avoiding the truth. Yet I hesitated, caught in the limbo of anxiety and regret. My mind raced with excuses that slipped through my fingers like dry sand. What could I even say? I couldn't bear the thought of seeing that hurt in his eyes, the shock that my careless indulgence had somehow justified a fracture in our hearts. "Talk to him, Ava. You're hiding, and you'll never find peace without it," Claire advised gently, concern etched onto her features as we sat in our favorite corner cafe, the aroma of rich coffee mingling with a bittersweet tension. "What if he hates me?" I finally confessed, the vulnerability shredding any last reserve I had clung to. "Maybe he does," Claire replied, her voice a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. But isn't that better than pretending? You need to confront the truth, for his sake and yours. As the evening drifted toward dusk, her words settled inside me, stirring a tempest that battered the shores of my consciousness. Perhaps hiding away in my bubble of hurt wasn't the path forward. Perhaps true reconciliation demanded a sacrifice greater than I had anticipated. But each time I considered reaching out to Sam, terror gripped me. The last time I'd seen him, the tension in the air had crackled with unsaid words. How could I unveil the ugly truth of my choices until I'd fully unravel them within myself? The churning feeling in my gut urged me to confront my fears, a clear call to action demanding I shed the cloak of invisibility I had cloaked myself in. Despite my reluctance, I found the days coalescing into a solitary truth that loomed larger than the guilt. There lay clarity in confrontation. The narrative of my life had evolved beyond my desires. I had hurt another, and the raw weight of that knowledge clung to my spirit, making each breath feel like a pact I had yet to honor. Then one quiet Saturday morning, as golden rays streamed through my window and illuminated the dust motes floating in the air, I stared at the blank page of a notepad. For the first time, the act of writing didn't feel like a rehearsal. It felt like a reckoning. The ache in my heart began to bleed onto the paper as I poured my fears, regrets, and admissions into the words, each one an offering laid at the altar of truth. There were no sugar-coated sentiments or pleas for sympathy. Instead, there was only stark honesty, raw and unfiltered. "I miss you," I wrote, the phrase carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies, threading through the paper like a lifeline reaching toward redemption. "I wish I could take back the hurt I've caused. I need you to know that I see the pain I inflicted not just upon you, but within myself." And as I continued to write, my thoughts crystallizing themselves into something tangible, my heart released the tight hold of despair. With each sentence, I transformed the chaotic dialogue raging inside my mind into a coherent message that captured the essence of my turmoil. I longed to convey more than words could grasp. I wanted to articulate the depth of my sorrow, the cavernous emptiness birthed from my choices, the echoes of laughter that faded into silence, and the remorse that had wrapped tightly around my soul. When I finally set the pen down, releasing the paper onto the table, a profound sense of clarity enveloped me. This wasn't merely a letter. It was a manifestation of my decision to stop running. It was my way of re-entering the narrative I had once cherished, to take responsibility for the beautiful mess I had created, an act of courage I had yet to realize I sorely needed. My undoing had beckoned this moment, a doorway to personal transformation that thrummed with promise. It didn't guarantee absolution, nor did it wipe away the painful memories. Yet the impending conversation with Sam suddenly felt less like a rebellion against my past and more like a reckoning woven with hope. And so it appeared undeniable. I was moving toward an encounter with Sam, not to reclaim what had been lost, but to face the truths within myself and take the first step toward unraveling the weight I'd carried for so long. Perhaps in this catharsis, I would find the opportunity to evolve beyond who I had been, allowing the remnants of our love to guide me into the light of a new dawn, however painful that journey would unveil itself to be. The moment I stepped into the cafe, the familiar scent of roasted coffee beans wafted through the air, wrapping around me like an old friend's embrace. I hadn't anticipated that the place I once frequented with Sam would greet me like a specter from my past, eroding the false sense of distance I'd built since our separation. Yet here I stood, a timid figure swaying slightly at the threshold, my heart racing uncontrollably while I surveyed the room, dread and resolve fighting a battle inside me. The cafe was warm and inviting, a sanctuary for the day's wanderers. Each booth nestled in a cozy corner enticed familiar faces and laughter that danced through the atmosphere, blending into the low hum of conversation, the sort of sound that once made my heart swell with a sense of community. As I stepped closer, a soft pang of nostalgia rang through me, bringing to life vivid moments shared with Sam, the way he'd cradle his mug, flashing that crooked smile that unraveled all my worries, or how he'd poke fun at the brisk barista who always fumbled our names, with affection of course. But those memories, now tinged with regret, felt like bittersweet echoes reverberating through the space, making the air heavy with unvoiced sentiments. My focus snapped back to my surroundings when I caught sight of him, the familiar silhouette hunched over a table, wearing the shadows of past heartache etched into the lines on his face. Sam was engrossed in a book, but there was an unmistakable tension in his posture. The corner of the cafe, once a sanctuary for us, now felt like a battlefield where our past clashed against the present. I hesitated, heart thudding. Summoning the courage to approach him felt akin to stepping onto a tightrope suspended over a chasm of uncertainties. But I couldn't turn back now. I didn't come here to retreat. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, each footfall echoing the silent resolve drumming inside me. Slowly, it dawned on me that each moment I lingered outside was time wasted, time where I could either illuminate the shadows of my choices or allow them to consume me whole. As I reached him, our eyes locked, and his face morphed from an expression of quiet concentration into one of startled disbelief. The thrill of emotions coursed through me, discreet but potent, a strange mix of longing and resolution igniting. "Ava," he said, the words spilling from his lips as if he were drawing it up from a deep reservoir of shared history. His tone was measured, yet underscored by an edge of pain that fluctuated between warmth and cold distance. Each syllable bore the weight of the mix of anger and hurt, an unarticulated prayer and a charged question encapsulated in one name. "Sam," I replied, my voice tremulous, laden with a burden of unspent regrets waiting to burst forth. It felt surreal to see him face to face after what had happened, and yet a flicker of safety sparked through the anxiety churning in my gut. Perhaps this was less about confrontation and more about unveiling the emotions we both buried too deeply. "I didn't think I'd see you here," he managed, carefully setting his book down, the gesture inherently protective, as if he sought to shield himself from the oncoming storm our reunion heralded. "I didn't want to stay away." I paused, the words hanging in the air like leaves poised to fall, but suspended by invisible threads. "I've missed you." The admission slipped out before I could cage it, leaving my heart thundering in its wake. His eyes softened momentarily before a flicker of guardedness reclaimed his expression. "You've missed me." The skepticism was palpable, his tone a careful balance of disbelief and hope. "Yes, I didn't want to hide the truth any longer. I realized that I took everything from you. I was careless." The remorse gushed forth, a tidal wave I had kept bottled for too long. "And I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I recognize the depth of my mistakes." I drew in a shaky breath, grounding myself in the starkness of reality, where every word hung heavy. "I've struggled with this weight I haven't been able to shake off." He shifted in his seat, a myriad of emotions swirling in his gaze. I was acutely aware of the tension building between us, like an electric current, crackling with potential for confrontation or understanding, and I had no idea which way it would snap. "Why now?" he asked, the vulnerability cracking through the stoicism he had worn so well. "Why come back after all this time?" "I didn't choose to come back, not like this," I replied, desperately clinging to honesty, as translucent as it felt. "I've spent months hiding from my own reflection, and I realize I can't move forward without confronting the past. I owe you that, Sam. I need you to know that your pain has become my reality." He leaned back, crossing his arms, and I could see the battle waging within him, the rage, sorrow, and the faintest glimmer of a heart still capable of hope. The moment felt suspended in time, with our lives existing in a liminal space braided with memory and the dream of healing. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said finally, his voice a quiet rumble that reverberated through the space, laden with sincerity. "You can't just waltz back into my life, Ava. You shattered everything. How can you expect me to just accept your words?" "I know I can't, and I don't expect that," I implored, my heart racing in my chest. "All I want is the chance to untangle this mess. Not to reclaim what we had, but to simply acknowledge it for both of us." My voice wavered slightly, but I pressed on. "I want to truly take responsibility. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the truth." As silence enveloped us, his furrowed brow revealed the tension coiling within him. I could see the anxiety, the gauging of possibilities stretching before him. Rich aromas from the cafe filled the air, but they felt overshadowed by the delicate tension mounted between us, a reminder of all that was lost, all that could still be. "Then let's talk about it." His voice cut through the silence, steely yet resolving. "If we're even going to make sense of anything, we owe it to ourselves to be honest." The tension gave way to something new, something resembling the tender shoots of growth peeking through the dim soil. And as we began to unfurl the layers of our shared past, I could feel the threads of our separate lives slowly weaving together again. This encounter, this moment, was our chance to confront what had haunted us both in our silence, a choice to step into the light and bear witness to one another's truth. As I prepared to dive into the tumult of our memories, the steely remnants of my guilt remained, intertwining with the flickering hope that perhaps this was the beginning of something anew.